One evening, one train, one murder no one saw, except for one woman who witnessed it all. The evening air hangs heavy with a chill, the sky painted in deep shades of blue as the small, isolated train station flickers with yellow lights. The rhythmic clatter of the station platform vibrates in the quiet night, and the murmurs of a tired crowd blend with the distant whistle of an approaching train. It's 4:50 p.m., the time etched into the atmosphere like a countdown, each second thick with anticipation. Elspeth McGillicuddy, a frail but sharp-eyed elderly woman, sits by the window of her carriage. Her hands are pressed against the cold glass, trembling slight not from the cold but from a strange gnawing unease that has been building within her all evening. Her gray eyes flick nervously as she scans the shadows of the tracks, where the fog seems to curl and cling like some lurking presence. The train beside her starts to pull in, its wheels screeching as it slows to a halt. Elspeth's heart races as she watches the faces of the passengers on the other train flash by, too fast to recognize, just blurred outlines in the fading light. For a brief moment she locks eyes with one of them, just a fleeting moment, but enough to freeze her breath. In that instant she sees something or someone. A body. A figure crumples to the ground, lifeless. The sound of a body hitting the cold steel of the track is almost drowned by the rumbling of the train as it moves away, taking the moment with it. The body vanishes as though it was never there. Elspeth blinks, stunned, her mind racing to comprehend what she's just seen, but the moment is gone. The train moves off. The platform seems to settle back into its usual rhythm. Did I imagine it? Elspeth whispers to herself, eyes darting to the passing passengers, none of whom seem to have noticed. She stands shakily, pressing her face to the window, searching desperately for any sign of the body, but it's gone. The fog swallows the tracks whole. Her breath comes in shallow, uneven gasps. She must tell someone. She must make them believe her. She stumbles down the train, voice trembling as she approaches the conductor, a young man with a stern face. There was someone on the tracks. A body, she insists. His eyes flicker with impatience, as if she's some over-sentimental old woman imagining things. Lady, you're tired and the station's cold. There's nothing there. Go sit down. We'll be at the next stop soon. His dismissiveness stings, but Elspeth presses on, trying to catch the eyes of anyone who will listen. The other passengers, too absorbed in their own world, offer nothing but cold stares, their faces indifferent to her frantic panic. Her heart sinks and she's left standing alone, uncertain, as the train pulls further into the darkened night. The investigation begins. The morning fog hangs heavily over the village, wrapping the world in a soft, haunting silence. The streets are deserted, save for a few early risers. Elspeth McGillicuddy's house is small and unassuming, nestled at the edge of the village. Inside, the walls are lined with faded photographs, memories of a time long past. The air smells faintly of dust, as though it has been untouched for years. Yet beneath the surface of her home, a sense of quiet tension lingers in unease that matches the storm of thoughts swirling in Elspeth's mind. When Miss Jane Marple arrives, it is with a quiet grace that contrasts with the turmoil of the events Elspeth has witnessed. Her presence is calm, but there's an intensity behind her gentle smile, an unspoken understanding that speaks louder than words. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual modest attire, steps into the home with the ease of someone who has seen far more than what meets the eye. Elspeth offers her a seat, but her hands tremble slightly as she pours tea. She can't shake the feeling that something is wrong, something that goes far deeper than just a fleeting vision of a dead body. Tell me everything again, Elspeth, Miss Marple says, her voice soft yet commanding, as she settles herself comfortably in the armchair opposite Elspeth. She listens intently, her eyes never leaving Elspeth's face, while her hands fold neatly in her lap. Elspeth begins her story once more, recounting every detail: the body, the disappearing act, the strange look in the train conductor's eyes. Her voice trembles, but Miss Marple's steady gaze reassures her. As Elspeth speaks, Miss Marple silently observes the room, her mind working in overdrive. She notes the slight creak of the floorboards, the position of the curtains, the way the light filters through the windows. The house is almost too quiet, as though the very walls are holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. After a moment of silence, Miss Marple stands. I think I need to take a look at the train schedules, she says, as if the answer to this mystery lies within the quiet routine of the trains. Elspeth watches confused, as Miss Marple walks over to a small writing desk where a stack of papers rests. The station schedules, tucked neatly inside an old envelope, are exactly where Elspeth had left them the night before, but Miss Marple approaches them as if they hold the key to unlocking something far greater. Miss Marple's fingers glide over the papers, her eyes scanning the routes, the times, the locations. She taps her chin thoughtfully as she flips through the timetable. The train you were on that night, she murmurs. It was not the last one to depart. There was another train and express leaving shortly after. It could have covered more ground than you realized. A body could have been moved before you even saw it. Elspeth's brow furrows. She hadn't considered that possibility. Her eyes follow Miss Marple as she methodically works, her mind sharp and calculating beneath the sweet exterior. And the route, Miss Marple continues, trailing a finger along the map. If the body was indeed discarded somewhere, it could have been anywhere along the stretch. Somewhere remote, somewhere no one would notice. The older woman seems lost in thought, but Elspeth is caught up in the whirlwind of her deductions. It's as if Miss Marple is seeing the pieces of a puzzle that no one else even knew existed. A knock at the door breaks their concentration. Elspeth's heart skips a beat. She opens it to reveal a mantle, with a worn, sunken face. It's Mr. Thomas, the local farmer. "Excuse me, Miss Marple, but there's something I think you should know," he says, eyes darting nervously around. "I've seen things, strange things on the trains lately. Folks acting odd. Nothing dangerous, but—" He hesitates, clearly unsure whether he should speak further. "Come in, Thomas," Miss Marple says gently, urging him to continue. "What have you seen?" Mr. Thomas steps inside, wiping his brow with a sleeve. "There's been a young woman," he begins, "always on the late train. Never in a hurry, never talking to anyone, just looking out the window. And then there's the conductor. He's been acting strange too. I don't know what it is, but it's like they're watching something or someone on those trains." Miss Marple's eyes narrow slightly. "You've been paying attention to details, Thomas. That's a good start." As Mr. Thomas continues, Miss Marple's mind races. She thinks back to the odd behavior of the conductor and the mysterious woman Elspeth had mentioned. Could these people have been involved in something darker than a simple disappearance? Before Miss Marple can ask another question, there's another knock at the door. This time, it's the local policeman, Constable Daniels. His face is flush, and he seems rattled, his usual stern demeanor faltering. "Miss Marple," he begins, his voice unusually strained, "we've had another incident. A young woman seen leaving the station last night has gone missing, vanished without a trace. We've searched the area, but there's no sign of her." The room grows heavy with tension. Miss Marple's mind pieces it all together. A dead body, a missing woman, and a station full of secrets. Her fingers curl into her lap as she exhales softly. "We must hurry," she says, her voice now steely and urgent. "The clock is ticking, and I fear there is far more at play here than we could have imagined." Cliffhanger ending. As the three of them stare at each other, each one with a sense of mounting dread, Miss Marple leans forward, her voice quiet but filled with purpose. "This is no coincidence. Someone is hiding something, and we will find them. But remember this, when the past tries to bury its secrets, it can be very dangerous to dig too deeply." The camera lingers on her sharp, calculating eyes before cutting to the fog outside, thickening with every passing second, swallowing up the village, leaving behind a sense of inevitability. The train tracks, once a route of travel, now seem like a dangerous web, drawing everyone in. Cliffhanger. Who's the woman that's gone missing? What connection does she have to the body Elspeth saw? The mystery deepens, and Miss Marple's calm demeanor only heightens the suspense as the audience is left on the edge of their seat, desperate to know what will unfold next. The suspects, the small, quiet village, is now thick with tension. The once friendly chatter of townsfolk has been replaced with hushed whispers and sideways glances, as if the very air carries a sense of uncertainty. Miss Marple, despite her frail appearance, walks through the village with a quiet, deliberate pace, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She has begun her investigation in earnest, and the first person she approaches is the station master, Mr. Edwards, a jittery man with an air of unease that matches the overcast sky. Mr. Edwards stands by the station, nervously adjusting his cap as if it's a lifeline. He seems polite enough, but there's a tremor in his voice when Miss Marple greets him. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," she says with her usual softness, but beneath her gentle tone, there's an unmistakable sharpness in her gaze. "I understand you were on duty the night of the incident." Mr. Edwards shifts uneasily, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Yes, ma'am, I was. But I don't really know much about it. Just a normal night, you know? Trains came and went, no problem." He laughs awkwardly, but Miss Marple senses the discomfort radiating from him, as if he's holding back something important. Of course, she says, her voice light, but it seems rather odd, doesn't it? Such a tragic thing happening right under your nose, and yet no one saw a thing? Don't you find that peculiar? Mr. Edwards's face stiffens for a moment. He forces a smile, but there's an undeniable flicker of fear in his eyes. I assure you, Miss Marple, I've been working here for years. Nothing out of the ordinary. Miss Marple nods, but she doesn't believe him. She can tell there's something hidden beneath his professional facade. I'm sure you must have seen a lot in your time here, Mr. Edwards. Perhaps you remember a woman, a young woman. She was seen rushing off the train that night, and she was rather frantic. Do you know who she is? The station master hesitates, visibly sweating now. I'm not sure who she was, ma'am. She was just a passenger like any other. But his words are so hurried, so unconvincing. Miss Marple smiles politely, but senses that this man knows more than he lets on. Thank you for your time, Mr. Edwards, she says, turning away. As she walks down the platform, she can feel the weight of his eyes on her. Watching, waiting. It's as though he fears her discovery, as though he fears that she might unearth something best left buried. Miss Marple allows herself a small smile. She's getting closer. Her next stop is the conductor, Mr. Calloway, a man whose presence on the trains is almost as constant as the rails themselves. He's tall, imposing, with sharp features and a quiet, deliberate way of speaking. When Miss Marple approaches him, his posture immediately shifts. There's something in the way he stands slightly rigid, slightly tense, that tells her he is aware of her scrutiny. Good morning, Mr. Calloway, she says, her voice sweet but laced with the undercurrent of suspicion. I understand you were on the train the night Elspeth McGillicuddy saw the body. What can you tell me about it? Mr. Calloway narrows his eyes slightly, his gaze cool, distant. I've already spoken with the police. There's nothing to add. I was doing my job, as usual. Nothing unusual happened. Miss Marple watches him carefully, noticing how his eyes avoid hers, flicking to the side as if searching for a way out. Of course. But you've been working on that route for quite some time now, haven't you? And it's not often that something like this happens. It's a shame, really, she continues, keeping her tone casual, yet just inquisitive enough to make him uncomfortable. Mr. Calloway glances around the station, his face betraying a hint of anxiety. There's nothing to say. People see things, Miss Marple. It happens. But Miss Marple's eyes lock onto his for just a moment too long, and she senses a deeper truth beneath his clipped words. Thank you for your time, Mr. Calloway, she says, though she knows she hasn't gotten all the answers she needs. As she walks away, she feels his gaze still following her. He's watching her, wondering just how much she knows, just how close she is to unraveling the threads he's tried so hard to conceal. Her next visit takes her to the local police station. Constable Daniels, a man who carries the weight of the town's security on his shoulders, seems strangely dismissive of the incident. He's young, with an air of authority that feels misplaced. When Miss Marple approaches him, he doesn't stand, but gestures for her to sit, almost as if it's beneath him to acknowledge her presence. Miss Marple, he says, his voice flat, I've already told you there's no mystery here. It was a simple accident. An old woman thought she saw something that wasn't there, and now we're all tangled up in this nonsense. Miss Marple's eyes narrow slightly, her lips curling into a soft but knowing smile. I'm sure it's just an accident, she says, her voice laced with a touch of irony. But accidents, Constable, have a way of leading to other things, things that might not be so. Accidental. She pauses, letting the weight of her words settle in. Tell me, Constable, have you ever felt that something wasn't quite right? About this case, I mean? Something you're not being told? For a brief second, a flicker of unease crosses Constable Daniel's face. His lips press together, and for just a moment Miss Marple catches him in a small hesitation, a slight shift in his posture. She feels it in her bones. I don't know what you mean, Miss Marple. It's all just a misunderstanding. She watches him, the faintest twinkle of suspicion dancing in her eyes. Perhaps, she says, turning to leave, but the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, Constable, even if we try to bury it. Cliffhanger ending. As Miss Marple walks away from the police station, she overhears a conversation between two local villagers near the alleyway. Did you hear? One whispers. The girl from the train. They found her. Or rather, part of her. The voice fades, swallowed by the noise of the village, but Miss Marple stops in her tracks, her heart racing. What does this mean? Was the body Elspeth saw on the train real? Or is there something much darker happening under the surface? The camera lingers on Miss Marple's face, her calm expression betraying a mind that is moving faster than the train itself. The pieces are falling into place, and she knows something the others don't. The stakes are rising, and she's closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Cliffhanger. What happened to the young woman who was on the train? What did Constable Daniels and the station master know that they're not telling? The mystery deepens with each passing moment, and the audience is left gripping their seats, desperate to find out what Miss Marple will uncover next. The midpoint twist. The tension in the small village has escalated. Miss Marple's investigation has led her to uncover more questions than answers, and each new discovery seems to deepen the mystery. Her calm exterior masks the wheels turning relentlessly in her mind as she pursues the truth no matter how dark it may be. It's a cold morning when Miss Marple, accompanied by a hesitant but willing Elspeth, boards the very same train that Elspeth had been on the night of the strange incident. The train itself feels oddly ominous today, as though it carries the weight of its own secrets. The usual clatter of the tracks, which once felt comforting, now feels like a ticking clock, counting down to an inevitable revelation. Miss Marple doesn't waste time. She takes her place in the same seat Elspeth occupied during the fateful journey. Her eyes sweep over every inch of the compartment, every detail. The faded curtains, the worn leather seats, the brass handles of the doors. It's a place that seems ordinary, but Miss Marple knows better. Ordinary is never just that in these cases. As she inspects the seat more carefully, she notices something odd as small, almost imperceptible tear in the fabric of the seat's cushion. A frayed edge, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. That's strange, Miss Marple murmurs, her voice barely above a whisper. Elspeth leans closer, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is it, Miss Marple? Miss Marple reaches down and gently pulls at the fabric, revealing a hidden compartment tucked inside the train seat. It's small, almost too narrow for anything of substance to fit inside. But there, wedged between the layers of old padding, is a strange, dark-colored piece of Clothinga silk scarf, stained in a way that only adds to the mystery. The fabric is luxurious, but the blood stain on it is unmistakable. Miss Marple's fingers graze over the fabric, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could have left this behind, and why? This is a piece of evidence, Miss Marple mutters, her voice more certain now. A crucial piece. Whoever left this behind knew something was about to happen, and they wanted to make sure no one could trace it back to them. Elspeth recoils, her face pale. So the murder wasn't just a figment of my imagination? Miss Marple's gaze sharpens, her eyes narrowing. No, Elspeth. There was something on that train, something dangerous, and it's much bigger than we thought. As the train rattles onward, Miss Marple takes careful note of the route it follows. She remembers the train schedules she'd studied earlier, cross-referencing them with Elspeth's account of the events. The train passed through several small stations, isolated, forgotten places that could serve as the perfect hiding spots for a body. Miss Marple's mind spins as she considers the possibilities. Could it be that the body is somewhere along this very route? Was it discarded in a remote area, hidden just out of sight, waiting to be discovered? But Miss Marple's thoughts are interrupted when a sudden, unexpected encounter shakes her out of her deep contemplation. As they approach the next station, the air seems to grow thicker, the quiet hum of the train turning into something far more ominous. A constable steps into the compartment, Constable Daniels. His face is flushed, his movements stiff and forced, as he looks directly at Miss Marple. Miss Marple, he says, his voice strained, we need to talk. The police don't appreciate your interference in this investigation. You've been poking around places you shouldn't be. Miss Marple studies him quietly, her eyes unreadable. I'm simply trying to find the truth, Constable. What's the harm in that? People are beginning to talk, he snaps, his eyes darting nervously. You're making waves, and you're starting to get too close to things we don't want you to uncover. Leave this to the proper authorities. But Miss Marple doesn't flinch. She knows that this reaction, this thinly veiled threat, means she's on to something important. I intend to finish what I've started, Constable, she says coolly. The truth is out there, and I won't stop until I find it. The air between them thickens, but before it can escalate, the train pulls into the station. Constable Daniels is quick to leave, but not before his eyes narrow in warning. As the train lurches to a stop, Miss Marple can't shake the feeling that the constable's presence is more than just a simple confrontation. His attempt to push her away felt too calculated, too deliberate. She's seen this before, the desperation in someone trying to keep a lid on a secret. Her instincts tell her something is terribly wrong. Cliffhanger ending. The scene shifts. Night falls quickly, and a fog begins to settle over the town. Miss Marple and Elspeth are back at her cottage, going over their findings. when a soft knock at the door interrupts the silence. Miss Marple rises, her footsteps light, though her heart is beating faster than usual. When she opens the door, she is greeted by an unexpected sight, an urgent, distraught figure standing in the doorway. It's one of the local villagers, pale and wide-eyed with fear. "They've found her," the villager gasps, breathing heavily. "The young woman. She's dead. But that's not all. Something's wrong with the body. It's like she's been moved, but..." Before the villager can finish, they falter, their voice breaking with terror. Miss Marple's heart sinks. She already knows this isn't just an accident, it's the beginning of something much darker. The cliffhanger. Who killed the young woman, and why? Why was she found in such a mysterious condition? With each question, the web of secrets tightens around Miss Marple, and the stakes have never been higher. What's waiting in the shadows? The answers are just out of reach. For now. The final act. The tension in the air is almost suffocating now. Miss Marple's investigation has led her to unravel an intricate web of lies, deceit, and hidden motives, all tangled within the seemingly quiet town. Each step she takes, each clue she uncovers, leads her further into a labyrinth of secrets that are dangerous to reveal. But Miss Marple, with her calm demeanor and sharp intellect, refuses to back down. The truth must be exposed, no matter the cost. It's a late afternoon when Miss Marple, after days of careful observation and quiet questioning, meets with Elspeth once more at her cottage. Elspeth, pale and exhausted, is visibly anxious. She's been haunted by the grisly images of the body and the overwhelming mystery that seems to be closing in on them. "Miss Marple," Elspeth says, voice trembling, "I don't know how much longer I can stand it. The fear is gnawing at me. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. The body, the blood, the death." Miss Marple's gaze softens for a moment. "I know, Elspeth, but we're getting closer. I'm certain of it. The pieces are almost in place." As Miss Marple speaks, the last few days' worth of clues finally begin to align in her mind. The station master, Mr. Rowland, his nervous demeanor, his secretive glances. The conductor, Mr. Felton, who always seemed to be lurking in the background, avoiding the spotlight. And the young woman, the mysterious, frantic figure seen running from the train, now found dead under strange circumstances. They were all linked, and Miss Marple could feel the pull of their connections tightening, each knot woven into the web of deceit. But there was something else, something that had been overlooked, something vital. Miss Marple had missed the peculiar glint in the station master's eye when he spoke of the trains. His words had been careful, almost rehearsed. She now realized that Rowland and Felton weren't just innocent men doing their jobs. No, they were part of something far darker, something far more dangerous. Miss Marple, though, doesn't reveal her suspicions right away. She allows Elspeth to grow more anxious, more desperate for answers, letting the tension build, making the discovery all the more powerful. That's when she returns to an old photograph she found hidden in a drawer at the station master's office. The photograph was crinkled, yellowed with age, and contained an image of a young woman perhaps a decade ago standing beside Mr. Rowland. But it wasn't just the station master in the picture that caught Miss Marple's eye. Behind him, in the shadowed background, was another figure, the young woman found dead earlier in the investigation. But the biggest shock came when Miss Marple noticed what was in the woman's hand. A small, delicate box that Miss Marple instantly recognized. It was identical to one she had seen in Mr. Felton's compartment, tucked into the corner of the train's lounge car during one of her earlier visits. It was a box used for smuggling valuable jewels, documents, anything that could be hidden away during the train's long journeys. This was no ordinary crime, Miss Marple muttered, piecing the fragments of the photograph together. The murder wasn't a random act. It was part of a bigger scheme, a scheme that has been hiding in plain sight. As Miss Marple connects the dots, her heart begins to race. She realizes that the station master and the conductor were involved in something far more sinister than a simple murder. The two men had been using the trains for smuggling a hidden operation that involved transporting illegal goods under the noses of unsuspecting passengers. The young woman, now dead, had stumbled upon their operation, and in a desperate bid to keep her silent, they had killed her. But what really chilled Miss Marple was the realization that the body Elspeth had seen falling from the train wasn't a random victim. It was someone who had been silenced, someone who had been involved in uncovering the truth behind the smuggling operation. Miss Marple gathers her thoughts, her sharp eyes darting over every piece of evidence, each one like a puzzle piece snapping into place. But as she heads to the station to confront the men responsible, she's interrupted. As she walks toward the train station, Elspeth by her side, Miss Marple is greeted by a peculiar sight, Mr. Roland and Mr. Felton standing together near the tracks, speaking in low voices, glancing nervously toward her. It's then that she realizes this isn't just a confrontation. This is a showdown. They know she's on to them. They can feel the noose tightening. Suddenly, as if on cue, the two men stop talking and turn to face her. Roland's face is twisted with a mixture of fear and something darker, more desperate. Felton, the conductor, doesn't flinch, but his hand hovers near his jacket pocket as though reaching for something concealed. "You should leave this to us, Miss Marple," Roland says in a voice that wavers slightly. "This isn't your business." Miss Marple's eyes narrow. "It became my business the moment a life was taken, and now it's my duty to ensure that the truth is revealed." Cliffhanger ending. Just as Miss Marple steps closer, a distant scream echoes through the station, a piercing, shrill cry that cuts through the quiet of the night, sending chills down her spine. The scream is followed by the sound of running footsteps, heavy with panic. Before she can react, the figures of two more people, Elspeth and a station worker, come into view, both visibly shaken. The worker gasps, but he can barely finish a sentence before collapsing, his eyes wide in horror. Miss Marple's gaze flicks between the fallen worker, Roland, and Felton, her mind racing. The scream came from somewhere near the trains, but what exactly did it mean? And who was screaming? In that one moment, everything stops. The truth is within her grasp, yet something one has just made a final desperate move to keep her from it. Miss Marple's heart pounds. There's one thing she knows for sure. The ending is coming, but it's not going to be what anyone expects. The scene fades to black. The truth is just a breath away. Who will survive to reveal it? The climax. The train station, which had once seemed like a place of routine and predictability, now pulses with tension. Every creak of the train tracks, every whisper of the wind through the night, feels charged with the weight of the truth about to be revealed. Miss Marple stands tall, her mind as sharp as ever, piecing together the final strands of the twisted puzzle before her. The faces of Mr. Roland and Mr. Felton linger in her mind like shadows. The two men, so unassuming at first glance, had hidden their dark secrets beneath layers of normalcy. But Miss Marple had seen through it, a leathery, nervous glance, every misplaced word. She knew the station master was the key. But even she hadn't anticipated the true extent of his deception. The station master stands before her, a picture of calmness. But beneath his composed exterior, a storm rages. He avoids eye contact, his lips pressed into a thin line, his hands clenched behind his back as if trying to hide something. Miss Marple's heart quickens. The tension between them is palpable. He knows she knows, but he's not willing to admit it just yet. "You are always too clever for your own good, Miss Marple," Roland finally says, his voice low and strained. His eyes flicker to Felton, who stands motionless at his side. "I tried to lead you down another path, but now it seems you've arrived at the truth." His words drip with menace. Miss Marple's expression remains unchanged. "The truth was there all along, Mr. Roland. You were just too busy hiding it." The air grows colder, and the shadows stretch longer as Roland's face begins to twist into something more sinister. The tension builds with every passing second. His secrets, once carefully buried, are starting to unravel at the seams. Miss Marple watches him closely, her mind already a step ahead, anticipating what comes next. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Roland mutters, his gaze darting nervously to the train platforms. "We were so careful, so careful. But she found out, and she had to be stopped." The realization hits Miss Marple like a bolt of lightning. She wasn't just some innocent bystander, was she? She knew about the smuggling ring. She'd uncovered something she shouldn't have, something too dangerous to leave alive. Miss Marple's voice is calm but sharp. Her eyes, as cold and calculating as ever, never leave his face. "So you silenced her, just like the others. And the poor woman on the train? She was collateral damage." Roland's eyes widen as Miss Marple nails the connection. In an instant, the full scope of Roland's crimes unfolds. The station master hadn't just been overseeing the trains. He had been using them for years as part of an underground smuggling operation, running illegal goods from one city to the next, under the very noses of unsuspecting passengers. He had carefully orchestrated each step, each movement, making sure his tracks were covered, until the one mistake, the young woman who stumbled upon his operation. She had been too curious, too eager to expose the truth, and for that she had paid with her life. But the unraveling of the truth comes with another revelation, a darker twist. Felton, the seemingly quiet conductor, steps forward, his hands trembling. It wasn't just him. I was part of it too. All those years, all those trains, we. His voice falters, guilt and fear spilling from him in a torrent. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but we had no choice. The money, the pressure. Miss Marple's gaze softens, but her voice remains firm. Everyone has a choice, Mr. Felton. You chose to play along, and in doing so you became as guilty as him. The air is thick with the weight of the confession. Roland, his facade finally crumbling, steps back, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and fear. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but she wouldn't stop asking questions. And you... His voice rises, but his eyes flicker in fear of Miss Marple. You have no idea what it's like to keep secrets like this for so long. Just as the truth finally breaks free, the sound of approaching footsteps breaks the silence. A figure emerges from the Shadosa figure who had been listening the entire time. It's Elspeth, her face pale and haunted, her hands trembling as she holds something in her hand. Her fingers are wrapped tightly around an old, frayed piece of paper, the last piece of the puzzle. I found this, she whispers, voice barely audible as she steps forward. The tension escalates to a fever pitch as she hands Miss Marple the paper. Miss Marple unfolds the crumpled note. It's a series of hastily written words covered in ink stains as though someone had been trying to hide them in a rush. The words are chilling. The one who knows too much will never leave this station alive. The final piece of the puzzle is revealed. But just as Miss Marple reaches for the final resolution, Roland's expression changes. In a flash of movement, he pulls out a hidden revolver, pointing it directly at Miss Marple. His hand shakes, but his eyes are wild with desperation. You've won, Miss Marple, he sneers, but you'll never leave this place alive. Cliffhanger ending. The room holds its breath as Miss Marple stands unmoving, her eyes locked onto the barrel of the gun. The seconds stretch on endlessly. A bead of sweat rolls down her forehead, but her calm composure doesn't falter. In the stillness, everything hangs in the balance. Will Miss Marple outwit the murderer one last time, or has she finally met her match?